Well, it is 11:03. We will call the Electric Utility Board meeting for January 18th, 2022 to order.
I'll call the Lubbock City Council to order in a special meeting. It is 11:03, pardon me.
Do we have anyone sign up for public comment? No public comment. All right, item 8, we need to approve the minutes from the special Electric Utility Board meetings on December 13th, 2021, the special EUB Board meeting on December 28th, 2021, and the regular Electric Utility Board meeting on December 15th, 2021. With the correction, there are 2 instances of Mr. Boatman in the roster of the December 13th, 2021 EUB meeting and the December 28th, 2021 EUB meeting. The correction is
So moved.
The correction is to replace the duplicate entry of Don Boatman with Solomon Fields, who was mistakenly omitted from both rosters. Mr. Schultz, do I have a motion?
Yes, sir.
Need a second?
Second.
Second. Any correction changes other than those? If not, we'll take a vote. All those in favor do so by saying aye. Aye.
Aye.
Eddie?
Mr. Chairman, I just would like to point out,
Eddie's-
we may want to redo the.
Yes, sir. I agree. Yes, sir.
Okay, those are approved.
Mr. Chairman, we may need to redo that vote. We need the likenesses of the board members visible on the screen. And so if y'all could enable your video so that we can see you as you're making the motion and so forth. Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Schultz, do I have a motion?
Yes, sir. I do the motion. So moved.
Have a second? I will second. Second by Butch. All those in favor do so by saying aye.
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 Thank you all. 3, A through L. Mr. McCall.
Good morning.
Morning.
So we've got a little different presentation today than what we've been presenting, but we've had a number of questions over the last couple of months, and so we thought we would just kind of bore in on some of these questions, some of the suggestions that have been made by various board members, and hopefully have some good dialogue and hopefully get a consensus of the board as to the direction that we need to head ourselves moving forward. So here's the questions that I wanted to present for discussion today. We'll provide some information and, of course, let y'all talk about them. So one of the questions is, should LP&L be the provider of last resort? That's been a recurring question that's come up. And then if LP&L is not the poller, is there a way to mitigate impacts that customers will experience receiving service from polar REPs? We're going to share some new information that we've obtained over just the last week or so that I think changes the picture a little bit from where we have thought it was going to be. So we'll share that with you. And then bullet point 3 is, should LP&L add a condition to the resolution that opt-in will not occur until the hold harmless payments have been completed in early 2027. As you know, as part of our integration into ERCOT settlement agreement with commissioners and the intervening parties in our integration docket, we agreed to pay $22 million a year for 5 years. So we'll talk about that as an option as well. And then the 4th bullet point, should LP&L undertake rate modifications to align with the retail market as an interim measure should our opt-in be postponed. And then lastly, should LP&L conduct a professional survey poll of customers to gauge their interest in joining the retail market? So that's what we have for you in this presentation. So over the last week, additional information has been received that has really profoundly changed our understanding of the scope and role of the provider of last resort. We've learned that very few customers in ERCOT are served on polar rates, less than 1%. And so that really significantly reduces our concern that LP&L customers will be subjected to the rates and terms and conditions of polar providers, which was our concern heading into this. And then the PUC has recently passed new rules for polar service that changed the polar rates pretty significantly as well. We'll talk about that. we've learned, of course, we have Pam Shaw that's working for us as a consultant now. I think she's with us. Yes, there's Pam. So we've learned a lot about Sherryland's entry into the retail market in 2014. We've learned a lot from talking to Pam about Sherryland's process, what steps they went through, and we have learned enough that we may want to follow their experience as an example that I think will really change the dynamics as well going into this. So first of all, some definitions. With regard to polar providers, there are large service providers, and that's companies that have more market share than any other market participants or retail electric providers. And so they are a retail electric provider that can be designated to provide polar service. Then you have voluntary retail electric providers. This is other retail electric providers that have volunteered to provide polar service. And so a polar provider can be either a volunteer retail electric provider or a large service provider. So that was one of the new things that we learned this week. And I'll talk about that some more here in a minute. So mass transition is when customers are transferred to one or more polar providers due to a defaulting retail electric provider. These mass transition events are relatively rare in ERCOT, and that's the only event that will result in customers being served by polar providers. So that's something new, because we thought at market entry we might have a pretty significant part of our customer base being served from polars, but what we've learned over the last week is that we're talking about that only occurring when you have a retail electric provider that defaults, and then all the customers that were served by that retail electric provider have to be transferred. So any questions about this slide? I know I'm throwing a lot of new terms at y'all this morning. So,
Mr. Chairman, Mr. McCullough, I'll have some questions about that exact procedure as we get further in, but I'm going to hold that for now.
okay. So mass transition of customers, let's talk about that. When you have a defaulting retail electric provider, the way that it works in ERCOT is that ERCOT must first transfer customers to voluntary retail electric providers. And these voluntary retail electric providers set a limit as to the number of customers that they're willing to serve. So once they reach that limit, then they won't take on any more. So if the number of easy IDs exceeds the amount that the voluntary reps are designated to serve, ERCOT must assign the remaining easy IDs to large service providers. So they're kind of the default of all the default providers. So if you fill up all the voluntary retail electric providers' buckets with what they're willing to serve, then you do go to the LSP. Let's talk about rates applicable to polar service. And this was new information for us as well. A voluntary retail electric provider must provide service to customers using a market-based month-to-month product. So what is a market-based product? It's a month-to-month product that is either offered to or matches the rate of a product offered to non-polar customers of the retail electric provider for the same TDU territory and the same customer class. And a month-to-month contract may not contain a termination fee or penalty. So when you have one of these mass transition events, customers get transferred to the voluntary REAPs on a market-based product first, and they're not subject to termination fees or penalties. Any questions about that?
Mr. Chairman, does that mean they can withdraw from the polar and enter into another provider at any time?
Yes. In fact, the polar providers, be it a voluntary REAP or a large service provider, both of those entities have to inform customers that they've been transferred to a polar, and that they, giving them guidance and advice that they should select a retail electric provider. So they still have the choice, and there's some obligations on the part of the polar providers to communicate with those customers that have been transferred over advise them that they should select a retail electric provider. And they're given an opportunity, and I forget whether it's two or 3 weeks, something like that, to do that before a deposit is even required of them. So they have a period of sort of a grace period under this polar rate, giving them time to select a retail electric provider of their choice. Okay, so the LSP rate is a little different, and that's the rate that we've looked at previously that was fairly high, you know, in the 15 cent per kilowatt hour range. So that rate is made up of non-bypassable charges, which is really the TDU charges, and the LSP customer charge, which is 6 cents a kilowatt hour for everybody. And then the energy charge, and this is the part that changed under the new rules of the PUC, because it was the average of the real-time settlement point price for the prior month, and now the PUC has spread that out so that it's an average over the previous 12 months. That's to give it a little more stability and less volatility if you, like for example, there were some customers that were switched after the February event. Well, that prior month retail or the real-time settlement point price for February was extremely high, so all those customers that got switched to Polars were on we're seeing a pretty good adder on that LSP energy charge for February, but with this new rule, it's spread out over the prior 12 months to kind of average rate. And then there's also a cap in that rate so that it cannot exceed 120% of the previous year's energy charge. Again, I think there will be relatively few customers on the LSP Polar, only in a mass transition event and only if the voluntary REAPS buckets get filled first, and then you have to fall back to the LSP. So now, one of the points that I should make is that all of these rules are PUC rules. Under the municipal rules in PURA, we can set up our own system, but I think we would want to follow this scheme to some degree, maybe not exactly, but we want to set up default retail electric providers that have market-based standard rates that customers would first be placed on in a mass transition event, and then lean on the LSP Polar relatively little or to a lesser extent. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman. Mr. McCullough, so let me make sure I'm understanding. So our process that you're describing here, this is the process for IOUs,
Yes.
and we're assuming we're going to, in effect, adopt more or less the same pattern or matrix, right?
Yes.
Okay, but the main difference here is these VREPs.
Right.
That's a bucket of reps who volunteered to take on a certain number of meters.
Right.
So let's say we've got 100,000 meters. We got how many VREPs do we think that's going to be? I mean, do we have any idea?
It's hard to say at this point in time. It could be, you know, if there's 40-something retail electric providers that offer service, it might be 6, it might be 5.
Okay.
It just depends on where their interest level.
But they would be willing to provide this, and I'm going to use the word more market mirroring tactic,
Right.
rather than what we had been talking about, which was that everybody goes in the Polar bucket at this
It's cost plus rate.
Right,
basically.
right, and then has to use the website to get out of that
Right.
bucket.
And hopefully do that as quickly as possible so that you
Right.
get onto a market-based rate.
So I guess, I mean, the details of that, I mean, how an individual, so I always have this picture in my mind of one of our citizens who's not sophisticated in utilizing a computer. You know, their electric bill's $125 a month under our current rates, or $130 under our current rates, right? Roughly 13 cents. So, or 12, was it 12.6 now? I can't remember.
Yeah, it's close to 13.
13. Anyway. And what we were looking at earlier was, okay, we jump into this and automatically their rate goes up 3 cents kilowatt hour, and they did nothing. that's been my issue
Right.
with this all along. That's one issue I have with it. So what you're telling me is, if we do this, someone will pick that ratepayer up as a VREP, and will offer them a competitive rate, and they don't have to choose. They don't have to exercise their power to choose
No.
on the website or whatever.
It might not be the optimum rate for their service, but
Right.
it's going to be better than Polar, because
Right.
it's a market-based rate, not a cost-plus rate.
Okay, okay.
Or
That's
better than LSP.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Well, that does change the picture considerably when you take into account the number of people who I believe are not going to make those kind of decisions.
Yeah, and of course, all we've talked about up till now is a mass transition event, which only occurs when a retail electric provider that was serving customers defaults. And so they go away, and all the customers that they were serving get transferred to
Well, so that's what we would be doing, though,
That's,
right?
that's what we're talking about right now, is a mass transition event. But in a minute, I'm going to talk about market entry, because that's another category where we have been thinking a significant number of our customers would be served by Polar, and I'm going to shed some light on that
Okay.
as well.
Okay, good deal.
right.
Thank you.
So this is some charts that Jenny came across that show the competitive retail market activity. And this is over the last 12 months. So you can see there's been quite a bit of activity with switches, where customers switch from one retail electric provider to another. The little purple area there is a mass acquisition or mass transition event because of defaults, and you can see there's a pretty large number of those that occurred in February. There are a number of retail electric providers went out of business, a few more in March, and then some in May. So there have been probably more mass transition events this year than what there have been historically, mainly because of the February event. Blue category is move-ins, where new customers establish new service. The red category, move out to CSA, that's a continuous service agreement, like apartment complexes or landlord-tenant situations, where the tenant is the one that decides the rate that they're going to be on, and then when customers moved into those rental units, they have to move into that deal.
I have a question on that. So, say you have 200 rent houses, they're going to, each individual property have to go set this, or are they going to be able to go get with a provider and
I think it's up.
get all up at once?
It's up to the landlord to make that decision. The landlord may want to set a standard rate package, because what happens right now with the property managers is they'll move customers in and out fairly frequently, and so when their property is vacant, they'll move that property back into their name for some time
And then put it
period
back
until they
on.
get it rented again, and then it goes back into the customer's name. So it makes sense for those large folks that have a lot of properties to have one retail electric provider that services all of their properties. And so I think that's what this has to do with continuous service agreement.
But that'd be an agreement between them and their tenant.
Right.
Saying this is who you're choosing.
Right. Okay, and then here's an interesting chart as well that looks at the observable selection of electric provider. And this goes back to 2002 when the retail market first started. So there's about 8 million total customers in the retail market right now. That number's a little smaller than what I thought it was, because there's 20-something million customers in the ERCOT market, but only 8 million of them are in the retail market. So about 4% in total have never made an observable selection of a retail electric provider. So whoever they started with is who they're still with. And it's a higher percentage on the residential customers, lower percentage on the large non-residential commercial type properties, and then smaller commercials also about 4%. So I thought that was interesting. Going back 20 years, there's still 4% of customers that have never switched. Now, I don't know what these properties look like. They may be hunting cabins or something like that, you know, it's just not worth the trouble to make a selection. But there's probably a fair amount of those that's just folks that don't have the wherewithal to shop the market.
Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Bowman?
David, I wonder where are you getting this data from?
This is from ERCOT.
From ERCOT?
Yes, sir.
All of this that you're presenting?
Yes, and it's fairly current data. It was done in the last couple of months. Okay, so again, we're still on the should LPNL be the provider of last resort, and now we're going to talk about market entry, and I'm going to talk a lot about Sharyland's example. If your questions get too detailed and beyond my expertise, I'll call Pam up here because she lived through this. She knows the answers to it, I'm sure. So Sharyland entered the retail market in May of 2014, and their experience is interesting and something that we probably need to study and may wish to follow. So the first thing they did is provided easy ID information. That's the customer meter information that really ties a specific customer down. It's really a meter number that goes to ERCOT during September 2013, and then submitted 12 months of historical usage for all of those IDs by February 2014. Their go-live date was May 2014, just so you'll keep that in the back of your mind. So then customer enrollment, beginning in February of 2014, they began submitting move-in transactions to ERCOT for new customers that retail electric providers started enrolling. So the market opened in Sharyland's territory about 2.5, 3 months before go live, and then retail electric providers started signing up customers. They were allowed to sign up customers and submit those move-ins from February 1st through April 13th. And then on April 14th, Sharyland determined which customers had not chosen a competitive retail electric provider and randomly assigned those customers to default retail electric providers. Similar to what we talked about on the mass transition event, these are retail electric providers that voluntarily agreed to accept customers that had not made a choice with market-based products. So again, my thinking all along has been when we first started in the market, we're going to have a large number of customers that don't make a choice, and they're going to wind up on the polar. Well, that's not, if we follow Sharyland's example, that's not what will happen. We'll randomly assign them to retail electric providers that offer standard rates, much like the mass transition event, except do it at market entry. So default retail electric provider certification. The eligible reps that wanted to serve as default reps tested with the new Sharyland TDU in the ERCOT set flight test. And once they were determined, Sharyland worked with ERCOT and the default reps to further refine the parameters for random assignment of customers. So this was all worked out with ERCOT before market entry so that they'd know how that process would be followed. But they identified the default reps, and then once you got close to the start date and you still had some customers that hadn't made a selection, they were randomly assigned to one of these default reps. And in Sharyland's case, it was 25% of their customers did not make a choice. So they were randomly assigned to default reps. Is that right, 25%?
Mr. McComb?
Yes,
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. As I recall, Sharyland was not a provider of retail service. They were
That's
just
correct.
transmission
That's
charges, which is important, I think, in the overall scheme of things, because their only way of recovering was through the TDU rate.
That's correct.
Okay. I'll make sure I got that.
They did not have an affiliated retail electric provider. They did not provide polar services. So they assigned all of the customers that had not made a choice to one of the default reps that they had identified and tested and had contracts with, et cetera. So what can we learn from this? What are the conclusions? At market entry, if we follow the Sharyland example, customers will either select a competitive retail electric provider or be randomly assigned a default retail electric provider if they have not made a selection by a certain date. If a mass transition event occurs, customers can first be assigned to VREPs that offer market-based products that are more attractively priced than the cost-plus rates of the LSP Polar providers. And as shown on the ERCOT charts, very few customers are served by Polar. So with this new information, staff believes there's minimal benefit to customers for LP&L to serve as the Polar, and staff recommends that LP&L not be designated as provider of last resort. I think we really need board guidance on this issue so that we can move forward with contracts, because right now the contracts that we have developed to date for the software and for the other things are designed with LP&L not being the Polar. As we've talked about, it becomes quite complicated, and it will take us about 6 months longer and $12 million more money to add that Polar option in there. We have had an opportunity to meet with Mr. Fields and had a good opportunity to go through in some technical details with him, since he had voiced some concern about the $12 million estimate and the complexity of going to Polar. I think he understands now, not to put words in his mouth, but I think he understands the need for that.
Mr. Fields, you good?
Yes, I am good. I do have a question for David. Based on this new information, how would a customer end up on Polar? If our mass entry is going to default those customers that do not choose, how would anybody end up on Polar?
Well, again, if we follow the Sharyland plan at market entry, we will assign the customers that have not made a selection to one of the default retail electric providers. So that would not be a Polar. That would be a retail electric provider that has a standard market-based product that they're willing to offer on a random assignment basis at market entry.
So in essence, we would have no one on Polar.
We'd have no one on Polar at market entry. Now, if we have a mass transition event that occurs afterwards, if we follow the PUC's example, we would have voluntary retail electric providers that would be willing to take customers in a mass transition event. We would assign it to those. We would assign the customers that are transitioning to those voluntary retail electric providers first. If all of those buckets get filled on the voluntary retail electric providers, then there might be some customers that would have to go to a large service provider type Polar that's the cost plus base rate, but hopefully that would be relatively few.
Have we given any thought to how we would educate the population for this type of project?
Mr. Rose has done some preliminary work on that. We've talked to Pam Shaw this morning. We had a meeting with her. It's a big project to educate customers. It's going to involve website. It's going to involve brochures, public meetings. It's going to be a big undertaking.
I think Jane had mentioned something to me in one of our prior meetings about maybe having some staff on hand to assist customers that are trying to decide service providers. Have y'all given any thought to that?
Yes, sir. I think we will have some trained CSRs that will be specialists in the retail market as we get closer to go live. And during this phase, when customers are told you need to select a competitive retail electric provider, we'll have folks trained that can assist customers one-on-one. We'll have website information that will help as well. And I think that, and Pam has some really good ideas about some other things we can do, public meetings and workshops, things like that.
Gwen?
It looks like to me with this new information, there's really two buckets, David. There's the the default or retail electric providers. You go one direction with that, which is that cost base. and then if there's a mass transition, there's another one. So we're hopeful that we'll be going the Sherryland route of the default retail providers. Is that correct?
Correct.
So
That's what I would
that's really
recommend.
the two columns you're talking about are buckets.
That's what I would recommend, is that we identify voluntary retail electric providers that are willing to accept customers that have not made a selection, that would be randomly assigned a certain number of customers, and they're, you know, we need to give them an option of capping that, because obviously they've got to procure power for all the customers that they acquire, so there may be limits to how many customers they can take on. But hopefully we will have enough depth there in that voluntary group that we can assign all of the customers to those default retail electric providers.
Right, so this new information has mitigated some of our fears. Would you say that's a correct?
It has for me.
Conclusion?
Yes.
Well, it's 4%, right?
4% have never made a selection, observable selections, the way ERCOT put it. Since market open, that's 20 years ago.
And we have 100,000 meters, what we're,
Be about 4,000.
yeah, 4,000 people, so.
Mr. Chairman, I have some other questions. So, David, this is the chicken and egg problem so we're assuming, we have to make an opt-in decision in order to get a bucket of VREPs. Can we get a bucket of VREPs first, or do we have to vote to opt in before we can find out who wants to be a VREP? I mean,
It's a good question. I think we could approach retail electric providers and have some discussion about this before the vote, if you would like for us to do that. I think you probably have a better chance of getting good results if you pass the resolution first, indicating your commitment to moving into that retail market. Then you're going to get their interest to a lot higher degree.
my next question concerns, and I've looked at this now for several months, and, you know, if you look at our data going back several years, we probably have anywhere from 5,000 to 7,000 meters a month that are disconnected, reconnected, cash payments, although we're not really tracking cash payments in that data. I guess that's included in the kiosk or part of it, but how are those folks going to be handled? How's that going to work when we do this? They're not going to be able to come to us and pay their bill and get their electricity turned on. And I mean, it's anywhere from 5, you know, sometimes it's more than that. It's, you know, 7,000 customers a month.
Yeah, you're exactly right. We have a lot of cash-paying customers. I don't know the specific answer to your question. Maybe Pam does, but I would say there's 8 million customers in the retail market in ERCOT, some of the major metropolitan areas that have some of the same demographics that we have with regard to the customers that are cash-only customers. There have to be ways for them to pay their bill. I mean, you know, right now we have a lot of payment options. They don't have to walk into the lobby, although a lot do. You can go to Western Union and hand them cash and get your bill paid. There's a lot of methods like that where customers can pay their bill. Anything to add, Pam?
You're on the right track. The retailers also, good morning. The retailers also have alternate ways to pay. A lot of Western Union payments, convenience stores. It would be up to the retailer whether they had certain contracts with Paymentus or different kinds of options, but they also have prepaid options. And sometimes a lot of cash customers can purchase prepaid plans. So there are creative ways for them to get money, and they're very willing to do that.
Mr. Taylor?
Well, I just have to, I mean, the information we had at the last meeting, those prepaid deals those rates wind up being very high at the end of the day. But I understand what you're saying.
A lot of college towns, I'm thinking Bryan College Station, they initiated some prepay, and they actually usually can waive a deposit because they get the money up front for prepay, and then they have like little monitors in the house. They can say, oh, I've used $10 today, and it helps parents know when to put money on the account, or the kids to go get money and put it on their account. So there are some ways that they've mitigated expensive rates, and it's kind of by, they know they're going to have their money, and it's not quite as vulnerable.
Other questions or comments? Vote.
Chairman, if we follow the Sherryland example, as Mr. Fields was talking about, all of our customers would end up in a default provider.
Not all.
Well,
Whichever.
those that didn't select a provider. Yeah. In the future, if we have a mass transfer, will we necessarily know that there's a mass transfer? Is that information sent back to us?
We will know.
You will know.
We
Okay.
will know, and then the way that works, I think ERCOT handles that random assignment now for the retail market, and I assume we could set up the same program with them where they would assign those customers to voluntary retail electric providers that we had worked to deal with. So
Okay.
still need to do a little homework on that, but I think that's the way it would work.
Well, LP&L will probably be the first call a customer makes when there's a problem, so I'm just trying to think through, will we know that they have a problem?
We'll know of a mass transition event. We'll get the the drop request, and we'll probably have some communications. We'll be in close communications with ERCOT once we start this program. They'll let us know if a retailer is going out of business. And generally, the way it's worked here lately, a lot of the retailers know in advance that they're fixing to exit the business, and they start communicating with their customers and telling them they need to select another provider even before the mass transition event occurs.
Ms. Patterson-Harris?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have a question, Mr. David. I hope you haven't answered it. I missed it. At the time of opting in, Miss Mary, if you will, chooses not to opt in. What amount of time would she be given to either make that decision or to be moved on into one of the VREPs or REPs? Right. Or is there a set time, or will that be determined at a later time?
Okay, so the way that it worked, get around here. The way that it worked with Sherryland was they started the market process in February with a May start date for the market. So customers had February, March until mid-April to select a retail electric provider of their choice. And obviously, when you get close to go live, if you've still got customers that have not made a choice, something's got to occur. So at that point in time, they executed this random assignment strategy that randomly assigned customers that had not made a choice to one of the default retail electric providers. So Miss Mary would have, 2.5 months to make that decision.
Other questions or comments? So it looks to me we have the resolution in here, not in here, but when we do take the vote, providing this to retail choice and not being the polar, there's going to be the and/or. Two different votes, or is it just one resolution with that being stated in
We
there?
don't have any resolutions for vote today. This
No,
is still
right,
just
I'm saying
a
as we-
discussion, but the option that y'all have seen so far does not designate LP&L as the polar, and that is our recommendation, that we go forward without LP&L being the polar.
No. Not voting no.
Well, we would like a consensus of the board so that,
That's right.
as we move forward, we need to know how to structure these contracts so that we can bring them back for approval. So
That's what I think their direction, or what direction we need to give today is what we expect to see in February,
Right.
so that we can make a decision as a board.
Mr. Chair?
Mm-hmm.
So I just want to get my head around this a little better. So we had been talking about, we saw a list of polars last meeting.
Right.
Where we had NRG, TXU, what's it? TXU.
TXU Energy, Reliant,
yeah.
and then Calpine had some
Calpine had
large
some.
customers.
Right.
That's
So
the only three
those are very
LSPs.
large, credit-worthy,
Right.
strong companies. these VREPs that we're talking about, I mean, I'm trying to get my arms around the fact that these people would be willing to take a certain number of meters.
Right.
And be the default provider at a competitive rate. If one of those were to default and go out of business, then that's what creates this mass transition event.
Right.
Let's say we had a VREP that had 20,000 meters and they go out of business for whatever reason. So do we have a responsibility to screen the creditworthiness of these companies? Is that something that we do? Does ERCOT do that? Who says that these people have standing to financially engage in what they're trying to do?
There are standard credit terms for retail electric providers. PUC monitors that, ERCOT monitors that. They have to pay their bills on time, or they can be quickly taken out of the market if they're not paying their bills. Of course, that's what we would be important about, because we'll be sending bills to REAPs and expecting them to pay the TDU charges. That's because we're going to be billing the retail electric providers. But yes, there are standard terms and conditions. We would have a contract with them. It's just kind of a standard TDU contract that we'll have with all the retail electric providers.
Any other questions or comments? Okay. So do you
All right.
want,
So can we, I guess I need some direction. Can we move? And maybe we can come back to this, because I've got some other information that you might want to see before we
okay,
come back to that. But
wrap that up, yeah, and then we'll
okay.
give the direction for next month.
All right. So then the other topic, one of the other topics is, if LPNL is not the Polar, is there a way to mitigate impacts to customers on Polar? And I think, as we have shown previously, there should be no customers on Polar at market go live if we follow the Sharyland model. For mass transition events, if LPNL follows the PUC ERCOT model of assigning transferred customers to voluntary retail electric providers at market-based rates, there should be minimal impacts to those customers. So I think our initial concern about the customers being impacted being on the Polar is already mitigated with this new information. But in general, I think how we can assist customers is with education prior to go live and even after go live, helping customers understand what they need to do, having an extensive education campaign. And we need to put a lot more work into that. Another suggestion that we've heard was to offer assistance to customers through Project Helping Hands. So that could come in several different ways. We could, the board could assign funds could budget funds for educational assistance to Project Helping Hands. Of course, you don't have to use Project Helping Hands for that, but you could if you wanted that to be the vehicle for ongoing educational assistance. Project Helping Hand or Community Development might provide direct assistance, and of course this could not be public funds used for that purpose, but could be private contributions or grant funds to source monies for assistance to eligible customers. So that's kind of how Project Helping Hands works right now. We get donations from customers. We could reach out to some of the large customers in Lubbock and see if they wouldn't fund some assistance for customers as well. And then another option is to provide information about management companies. We've talked about the management companies that will, for a nominal fee, assist customers in choosing a retail electric provider. And for $35 to $120 a year, companies will do a lot of the legwork for you. In some cases, do all of the legwork for you. Of course, that's at the higher end of the pricing scale, but they will they'll take your load history and optimize look at all the retail electric provider plans that are available, select the one that best matches your characteristics of your load, and guarantee that that's the lowest rate available for your service.
Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Bowman?
David, Help me out here a minute. Going back a page or two, on this market-based rates, I need a little bit more about how that's determined.
Market-based rates?
Yeah, because the base rate is approximately, what, half of the bill? The rest of it is add-ons and what have you, service charges, this, that, and the other. Won't all that be determined by the VREP?
Yes, sir. But it would be, the way that it works in ERCOT right now, it's a market, through the PUC rules, is it a market-based product. I've got it up here. It's a month-to-month product that is either offered to or matches the rate of a product offered to non-polar customers. So it's something you should be able to find on the Power to Choose website.
But there's no limitations on that portion of the bill, is there, as far as the VREP's concerned? I mean,
Well,
they can make any kind of a deal they want or add anything they want. Is that not right?
No, it would be a rate that, a fixed rate that they have offered on the website for other customers, or something that matches that very closely, based on my understanding. Now, their rate might not be the lowest rate on Power to Choose website, but it's a standard product that they offer.
There would have to be some kind of difference between these providers.
Yep.
In order to offer somebody a rate better than the other guy to get them to be a customer.
Right.
So that means that really there's really no limitation or regulation on what those producers can charge, is it?
Well, it's a competitive rate, and the competitive market
For
works.
instance, well, they have the base rate, say 6 cents or whatever. By the time they're finished adding everything up, we're talking about what, 12, 13, 14?
No, the 6 cent rate now was on the LSP polar, not on the VREP. So,
But that would be the market rate, wouldn't it?
no, the LSP rate is the cost plus rate, and that's what we think we can stay away from that for.
I guess what I'm dancing around here is, what is the ultimate bill to the customer on some of this stuff?
Right.
It sounds like it could go higher than what.
Yeah, it's a market-based rate gives you some protection, because if a retail electric provider is competing in the marketplace, their rates cannot be so out of line that they're not acquiring any market share. So they've got, that's the fundamental ideal behind competitive market, is that competition forces customers to be competitive on their rates.
What happens to the customer during all these mass transitions and everything else, as far as them knowing who they're getting their electricity from, who they're supposed to pay, whether their lights are going to be on in the interim or what?
Yeah,
how is that handled?
There's notification requirements of the retail electric provider that is now serving that customer, so they have to give them written communications in a timely manner to let them know that they have been assigned to that retail electric provider, and also giving them information about their option to choose a different retail electric provider without penalty. So,
Thank you.
mm-hmm. Any other questions on this one, or you want to keep moving?
Keep moving.
Brother Chairman,
Ms. Phillips?
on that second bullet there, if LPNL is not the polar, I appreciate David's comments on the part, the project helping hand, the management companies. I think that definitely mitigates some of my concern for those customers that may not be computer literate, which, we would think it would be a small percentage, but still, sometimes the squeaky wheel can be the noisiest. So I think that part is good, and I would hope that we would definitely consider something to help our customers. And even those that can afford it, the management companies would be a good option, so they don't have to worry about, am I getting the best rate?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, sir.
David, could or should LP&L be one of these management companies, whether we charge a fee or not?
It's a good question. That's one I haven't thought of. I think the board could certainly fund money for us to serve in that role. I mean, you'd have to have some people designated to be the assistants CSRs, but and that's kind of what we've talked about. I envision that before market go live and after market go live, we'll have CSRs that can assist customers that are having trouble with it. And that, it's going to require X number of people to be available to assist customers. But
So that's what I foresee, is that LP&L get the first call and say, help me, help me. We need to have people that can help them.
right.
I think in the transitional period, it would be good. I don't see it as ongoing, though. That's a cost that's probably not justified. Initially, absolutely.
Mr. Chairman, I would sort of echo that. I don't know if that's, if you call that a management fee or whatever, but the education piece of that's going to be a large undertaking to get the public up to speed on what this is going to entail for them.
Yes, sir.
But sorry, it's a pretty thin line, because then we're helping them choose who they're doing, and now we're pointing them in a direction. We can't do that. I mean, there's.
Yeah, no, we need to remain independent and not show favoritism towards one retail electric provider or another, but I think we can give them the principles about, what makes sense to do, like we've talked about before, choose a fixed price contract, avoid some of the quirky rates, and et cetera, et cetera.
The point is, they can't come into here, sit down, and click on the internet, and say, "This is who you're going with."
No.
And that's not ever
No,
going to happen.
we should not do that.
Right.
Now, the management companies, the ones that are paid a fee, that's exactly what they would do, because their goal is to get you in the best rate for your characteristics.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Okay, so here's a new topic.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Ms. Joy, didn't see you.
Just kind of along the same line that you're talking about, my question was offering assistance even after go live. For how long and at what cost? And that ties back into Richard's question about a management company. I'm not sure legally LP&L could do that. That's somebody else's call. But I would like to know how long are we going to be holding hands for people, and at what cost, and who's going to pick up that cost? And I think Solomon kind of talked about that a little bit without any detail. My other concern is that this most recent information obviously has been out there. We just haven't dug in it, I guess. I don't know. But there are cities all over the state of Texas who have done this. They're in the competitive market. And I understand we're the first of our kind to do this. But one thing we do need to recognize is that I think our citizens are brighter than some people think they are. And I think with some education and assistance they can do it. But we need to decide. We can't just keep talking about opt-in and are we or aren't we. We have got to make a decision. And all of this new information, to me, slows that process down a little bit. So I'm a little bit worried about it, because I think we have a timeline that we're trying to meet, and if we need to spend more time at a meeting talking about the new information, that's great, but we've got to continue on, and we've got to make that decision. We can't just continue here. If we don't opt in, then there are a lot of questions that have got to be answered. So those are my thoughts. I do not want us to get into permanently holding hands if we do opt in.
Okay, next topic. We have a board member that has suggested that prior to LP&L entering the retail market, a condition should be added to the opt-in resolution to require that hold harmless fees would be paid in full prior to opt-in. The annual ERCOT hold harmless fee is $22 million a year. Payments will begin when the PUC approves LPNL's interim update T-cost transmission cost of service rate. If the T-cost rate is approved in early '22, hold harmless payments would be paid off by early 2027. So we don't know for sure when our T-cost rate will be approved. I know the commission has had it for posting since October. I know they've been tied up on some on other important matters, but hopefully that will get approved fairly quickly. But we have not even begun starting to make the $22 million payments yet, and will not until we get our rate approved. So I think the concept behind this was, when you enter the market, you want to be have the best chance of success that you possibly can. You want to be at a rate position where you're basically at a level playing field with other market participants, and that was kind of concept behind it.
Mr. McCollum, yeah, I suggested this, or at least I'm for it, in the sense that I want to enter the retail market or have our TDU rate be as reasonable or as low as possible in order to avoid the Sherryland example of bringing in a very high wires charges. So now, given the other information that we're looking at here, our initial estimated rate does not appear to be outside the mean from what we've seen across the state. I still think you could make an argument for deferring that to the time when your TDU rate would be, when you've gotten past all these initial costs, so to speak, or deferred revenues, so that we could have the most reasonable TDU rate.
So, yeah, just to pick up on that, the hold harmless fee adds about eight mils to the transmission distribution rate. So the initial estimate was that upon market entry, our rate would be 0.0457, and once the hold harmless fee is paid off, the rate could drop to 0.0377. Y'all have seen that slide before, and here's kind of a graphic that shows how we would rank. You can see that our rate would be kind of in the median with the other TDUs as it stands, based on the estimate that, and it's early estimate, don't hold us to that number. Joe wanted me to make that point. Until we've got a full cost of service study completed, then we won't have that number refined, but it looks like we'll be in the middle of the pack based on where the other TDUs are right now. So I would like to say that if this condition is approved by the Electric Utility Board, it is recommended that action on the opt-in resolution and action on the billing system changes to support retail choice be deferred. If you're pushing off joining the retail market until 2027, I don't think you want to act on the resolution at this date, or on the contracts. Obviously, if you don't want to spend money prematurely if it's going to be 5 years before you join the market.
Ms. Hubbard?
David, what is the risk to delaying it that long, and what is the benefit to delaying it that long to the customers with time and money, I guess?
Yeah, obviously, if you delay the software, it's going to be higher cost later on, most likely. I mean, everything escalates through time. Labor costs, support costs, all that will be higher. I think the real risk, in my view, is you're going to be, 2 years from now, you're going to be dealing with new city council. You're going to be dealing with some new board members, people that haven't been here all along, that don't have the wisdom that they've gained through the last few years of talking about this, and would take some time to get everyone up to speed. So I think and of course, could become a political issue. I don't know whether it would or wouldn't, but that's a possibility if you wait. The benefits of waiting would be you can see how the market design changes that the PUC is working on, see how those shake out. Give that a little more time to work its way through, make sure the retail market is not harmed in that process, which I don't see anything right now that threatens the retail market, but I have had some concerns about some of their proposals, but retail market seems to be churning along. And you know, when I looked at the number of providers in October, there were fewer then than there are most recently when I looked at it. So it seems like it's picked up a little steam just in the last couple of months. So the stuff that the PUC is working on hasn't seemed to scare the retail market.
Mr. Taylor?
As far as our, and I'm going to change the subject just slightly, as far as our purchases of power in the wholesale purchase and competitive price, I mean, would you say we've been doing that for what, 6 months roughly? Has that been commensurate with our expectations? Do we see that our risk is more than we anticipated from our purchase power activities? Or what's your overall assessment of that? I know that may be an unfair question, but.
Yeah, I think it's gone pretty well like we expected, except that gas prices have gone up pretty dramatically. Obviously we bought a lot of block energy at a time when gas prices were lower, and we wished we had bought more in hindsight. But that's the challenge of the market, is knowing when to pull the trigger and how much to hedge. We've got some good help with the folks that we work with, but I think if you decide to defer, and that's a good point, one that I didn't mention earlier, is there are ongoing risks to being in the power supply business. It's the number one risk that utilities face. We saw that in February with a number of utilities going bankrupt because of the fact that they weren't adequately hedged and their generating units didn't run the way they should have. It's the number one risk that we face. Of course, it's 2/3 of our budget right now. We've talked about that before, so I spend a lot of time on it, but that's one of the advantages, I think, in joining the retail market, is you get that risk completely out of your operating scenario. I will say, if you decide to defer opt-in, we probably want to think about adding some folks. I know that in talking with Joe about this, he would really like to have more staff to help him with this, people that could become specialized in some of the stuff that he works on every day. And so we probably need to add some power supply staff to help keep an eye on this.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, sir. Mr. Mayor?
I find today's discussion to be interesting. The data around Polar, I think, took a really big potential problem, decision point, whatever you want to call it, off the table. I really hope that this EUB and the existing city council, which will change in the May elections, will deal with, address, step up, whichever it may be, to these decisions that are in front of us. I think that we've been educated. I see, Greg, I was thinking about your proposal. As much as I understand the why, I don't see it's hard for me to foresee what 2027 would look like. And I think I'd still support this opt-in to the retail competitive market, doing it in 2023 as the last 30% of our load become after that load becomes part of the ERCOT market, and giving our citizens choice, which I think we've spent a lot of time talking about that part of our population that might not either support this or it catch their attention. I think the vast majority of our citizens want competition. I know our business market wants competition. And I think we need to keep in mind that, and I can tell you that anecdotally, I can tell you by email volume, I can tell you too by the people I talk to, that's what our citizens want. And sometimes we make decisions based upon what they, that's not the most important factor. I grant you that, but I think we are on the right track to make some decisions in the next 6 weeks. I thought Latrell's comments a minute ago were spot on. I particularly, and I think Mr. Fields said made a very good point too. Once we make this decision, we're not going to be a retail electric provider anymore. And some of the costs that go along with being a retail electric provider need to go away. There needs to be a fair transition. We owe that to our ratepayers, our citizens. But we have to shift. Yeah, we'll be a different kind of business. And that's certainly a big part of this discussion and decision framework. That's all I got.
Thank you, Mayor. Last thing I think in here is the survey.
Yeah, the last item is, should we there was another one is, if we defer till 2027, would we want to undertake rate modifications to align closer with the retail market as an interim measure? Our rates are currently designed based on cost of service. You could modify to shift rates to more closely align with where the market is, match the market concept. We'd have to have our rate design consultant probably set through some workshops with the board and the city council to talk about the levers that you have available to pull to move those rates around. And I will say that anytime you shift costs between rate classes, it becomes a hot potato. It's a public policy matter that will gather a lot of discussion. And it's a zero-sum game. If you benefit one group of customers, you're going to cause costs to go up for another group of customers. So it's I like the cost of service model that we've adopted. I don't recommend that we change off of that, but I understand the reason for this concept is to try to make some adjustments that would get us closer to the market as an interim measure. Obviously, if we don't defer, then it becomes a moot point.
What's the benefit of this, of a rate modification?
The benefit would be trying to get closer to what customers would otherwise receive from a competitive retail market. And I can't tell you exactly what changes would need to be made to get there. I know the expectation is that some of your larger customers expect to receive some pretty significant benefits in the competitive market. So if you adjusted your rates so that your largest customers got lower rates, you've got to adjust your rates so that your other customers get higher rates, and that's the dilemma.
Sounds like a headache.
Sounds like a what?
Sounds like a headache.
Yeah.
I don't think we want to go down that road of changing rates. I think the cost of service model has served us well and needs to continue to. And I think, as the mayor said, the retail market will offer something to our citizens that gives them choice, which I think is very important.
Okay, and then last but not least is the survey question. And so I'm going to ask Mr. Rose to cover this one.
Okay. So we did have, in discussions with several board members, we did have the topic come up of trying to get some idea more scientifically of what our customers feel about making this transition. So in a fairly quick fashion, we have evaluated what's necessary in order to us to conduct a scientific polar survey. Obviously, we would need to get this done very quickly because y'all would need to have this information, by this next month. So in looking at this, there's, you can conduct a poll or a survey. Both are going to get you scientific results. It's just a difference in how the data is gathered. A poll is traditionally going to be you've got a set of folks and you're going to randomly call and you're going to try to make sure that you get, a good spread, of various different customers, hit a certain mark. A survey is more of exactly who that you're going to go survey. You set it up front, and then you contact these folks, making sure that you get, again, a good split out between different types of customers. Conducting a survey can be done by a person who does that locally here. If we do a poll, there's an individual that has a Texas-based firm that we can go with. Challenges, obviously, in something like this are the short time frame. In order to get enough qualified responses, you're looking at the typical utilities survey or poll. You're going to have at least 800 customers that you're going to poll, taking into account proper vetting to get a diverse set of responses. You're going to try to get it split between 400 on the phone and 400 by email. And the cost associated with conducting a full polar survey is it's somewhat substantial, but it's not insurmountable. And I already budget on an annual basis a cost for this should this type of thing come up. So it's already in the budget. You would be looking at a number, typically an annual customer survey for a utility or co-op is going to run you about $25,000 to $30,000. This is not going to be a full, annual customer survey, but that's kind of on the high end what we'd be budgeting. One of the other challenges you're going to have conducting a poll or a survey for something like this is making sure that the customer is properly educated when you ask these questions so you're getting the right information back. You're going to be looking at trying to quickly educate them on what opting in looks like. A lot of what y'all have talked about here. What does the structure of LP&L look like on the back end of this should we opt in? And what's the value to the community in that instance? In a relative sense, what do rates look like in the competitive market versus where they are today? And most importantly, as a customer, what is required of me? One of the interesting things in doing like a survey, if you are able to do it via email, is that you can include links that say send them to the Power to Choose website. So you can ask the question to say, are you familiar with the Power to Choose website? Have them follow the link. Take a look at it. What do you think about this? Do you feel like this is something that you would like to do or not? So you can kind of break it down further. So you're not just asking the question, do you want competition or not? But you're trying to very quickly get them to a place where they know what that looks like so they're making an educated response so that you can have the best information available. Annual polling and surveying is commonly used in our industry. One of the things that I've done this past week, aside from reaching out to the two entities that we could possibly go with, is also talking to other utilities and cooperatives around the state of our relative size. Each one of them already does an annual survey. And so that's how I kind of checked the information that I got from these two companies versus what others have seen in the industry. So not necessarily a resolution in front of you, but wanted to let you know that it's something that we put together quickly, and unless there is a major objection to this, we can try to very quickly set this up, put it together, go out in the field, and then have the information back to you by February 15th. That would be the goal. So are there any questions on
Questions or comments on
procedure
that?
of this, or just overall?
Okay. No
Matt,
questions?
Matt,
Yes.
Will you run, is this going to be one big survey, or will you go after both, segment it between sort of your commercial, business, and residential?
I don't know exactly if it's going to be, all of these different customer classes in one day, but I do know that we'll need to get this done fairly quickly. So the most work that we're going to need to get done is making sure that we've got the right subset of customers to poll or survey. That'll take probably, it's a short time frame, but that'll take the most time because obviously we don't want to call somebody in specs territory and ask them if they think LPNL customers should opt in. Plus, just on the front end, education-wise, we need to make sure that they understand that LPNL does just provide electric service, so they don't think that it's changing the way that they get water or stormwater or wastewater, these things. But I don't know the exact answer, Mayor, but I know that we want to be out in the field for a few days at least to try to make sure we get all of our responses. And again, trying to get an equal number from each bucket. And if we have the time, what you'd like to see is to break it down further and try to see, by average, consumption. Somebody on average uses 700 kilowatt hours a month versus 1,500 kilowatt hours a month. What are their feelings on this? But again, it's just going to be driven by how much time we have to get this put together.
Ms. Fields?
Are you looking for direction from us?
Just wanted to make sure that there weren't any major objections. I know that there are some on the board that would like to see this information, so we wanted to tell you where we are on this and that we're going to proceed forward unless there was a major objection.
Ms. Henry, you need to say something?
Yeah, well, I'm trying to make a comment. What happens if, like sometimes happens in Lubbock, people don't quite understand it and things like the streets get voted down? What happens if we get a survey that says, no, we don't want to do it?
Right. I mean, there's a certain level of expertise that comes in on the person that's doing the polling or the surveying to make sure that they're getting an educated response back. And again, that's going to be the biggest challenge is that person that you get on the phone, educating them up front on what you're actually asking them. Because again, if you just ask somebody in a general sense, would you like competition? They'd probably say yes. But if they know what it is to be in the competitive market, that may change their opinion somewhat. So that's going to be crucial and make sure we get the right information back.
I don't see how you can do that in a month. It's taken forever to educate us.
This is true, and that's why it's the biggest challenge, I think, outside of the short time frame. Yes, ma'am.
I wonder if it'd do more harm than good.
I think having a level of information at our disposal will be good. You're gonna have an assigned margin of error in this, and that's what you're trying to hit is that plus or minus 3.5% is the goal. But as the mayor said, we do have lots of anecdotal information in terms of what we hear from the public, what we see coming through on email. But this would be the first time that we'd have any sort of scientific data at our disposal. Yes, Mr. Christian.
Well, to me, this is about 3 years too late. Am I on? 3 years too late. Unfortunately, we're policymakers, you're policymakers making recommendations to us. And those decisions are not always easy. But to try to take a small number of people and educate them in a short period of time, to me, is absurd. We're trying, as was referenced earlier, to cram into a very short period of time something that's been going on with us on a monthly basis. I'm looking around the room tonight and today, and I don't see any citizens. There may be some listening. I doubt it. And Jane's comments are well taken. What happens when you get that result you don't want, or even if you get the result you do want? That's not our job to let a few people dictate what this board determines to be done and what this council determines to be done. Look at your last elections. We don't get good participation, and so you're allowing a few people, even if they're hand-selected by this outfit. I am very opposed to doing this. This may be somebody's idea of what we call a CYA. We don't need a CYA. Everything that this board has done since we started talking about joining ERCOT and having competition, you all have worked and worked, and you have sought and you've sought and you've researched and you've researched. And the council's been right there with you doing the same thing. So I am opposed, very opposed to doing this, and I certainly think that the timing is terrible. Other than that, I don't have any opinions.
I agree.
Mr. Christian, did you have something? No?
Yes,
Oh, go ahead.
yes, sir. I would tend to agree with both of the ladies. I do think that we have some historical information that says that, I don't remember what year it was, that the citizens of Lubbock, Texas did request for us to seek a way to have competition. And I think that we lean on that in regards to our response to our citizens. If there are some individuals that would want to speak to any of the council members in regards to their thoughts about opting in, I think that's perfectly fine, and I encourage it. But I do think that a survey, as they say, is a slippery slope. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Christian. Do you have anything, other questions or comments? Ms. Stafford?
Yes.
I agree with Ms. Henry that it's going to be a challenge for somebody in a 10 or 15-minute survey to gather what we've been working on for 2 or 3 years. And I have faith in this board and the council that we have gone through the process. And I just think that, as Ms. Henry said, I think there could be more harm than help.
The only thing that I would add, and I don't disagree timing-wise or anything else, the only thing I would add is that going out into the field and doing a poll or survey, the individuals that we would hire, it would be 800 is the normal sample size, and it'd be scientific. I don't want us to lean too far on that poll from a couple of years ago, because it was an online poll that was part of a petition. And we did have a lot of people respond immediately. We also found a lot of those people don't live in Lubbock. And so this would be kind of one last effort to try to get information from our customers that are affected. And it would be a big challenge. And it may be one that you can't educate people in 15 minutes. But it is an effort before y'all make a final vote to get a scientific readout. And it may be insurmountable in terms of getting that information. But that was the thought process at this juncture. But I'm happy to take direction either way from board and council.
Ms. Henry, did you have something else? Nope, okay.
Mr. Chair, one other thought, if you would.
Yep, sorry.
If we were to do anything to engage the citizens of Lubbock in regards to I'm going to call a poll, or maybe it's more of a questionnaire structure of this, then one of the first sentences that or first questions you would ask in that survey is, what do you know about opting in?
Right.
In other words, if you were to develop a tool that we're not asking whether they want to opt in or not, but I would like to know how much our citizens know about what you guys have been doing for the last 3 years.
Yes,
I
sir.
think there's a component of this that could be beneficial to us, but I don't whether it's up or down of whether we ought to opt in. But I think that's at least some thoughts that if you move forward with something like this, I think a structure of the questionnaire might be beneficial.
It would definitely, you would definitely start out with, and you would hopefully know this already from the data that you've compiled from the database. But the first question would be, are you a customer of LPNL, and do you receive electric service? The second one would be, are you the individual in your household that makes decisions regarding your electric purchasing? And then you would launch straight into, are you aware of, how much do you know about this? And there'd be that education component. So absolutely, if we were to go this route, that would be first and foremost. Yeah.
Other questions or comments?
Mr. Chair,
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Rose, I think that's what you've been doing for the last 3 to 4 years.
true.
On a regular basis, letting the public know what's going on. We've held every kind of meeting. We've had you at town halls. We've been in this process the whole time with the community. He's gone on television. It's been in the newspaper. It's been on radio. It's been in our bills, everything. So what else is there to do other than to ask 800 people out of a city of over 260,000 people? Not all of which are on LPNL, but about 100 and, how many, David? 107,000 people.
Mr. Griffith?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've been doing a survey for 8 years. And I've yet to find anyone in this process that has told me this isn't a positive move for the citizens of Lubbock and how electricity is acquired, not just a move to ERCOT, but a move to a competitive situation, a move that the rest of our state is enjoying. I appreciate the new data that has been brought forth today about the polar and how little of our population is affected by use of a polar. And that rate change that made me nervous does not make me nervous at all. The point is that look at the rest of our state and how other cities have enjoyed deregulation. The competitive market is everything that we've ever wanted. It is the American way. The other part of this is I'm probably the last guy that wanted to adapt to Facebook or internet. But we all make choices every day, whether we're drug into it or not, with technology. And making choice about who you're selecting as your power provider is the American way. I truly believe that we've done a great job, and I appreciate everybody on the Electric Utility Board that has served and has continued to serve this city. This is very, very important, in my opinion, that we go forward with this and do it as soon as possible. It is the best for our citizens. Once we get into the market, remember, as Mr. McCullough pointed out, over 100,000 different customer billing opportunities. There's going to be a whole lot of marketing education by those providers to make sure that customers sign up with them. Thank you.
Thank you.
So just reading the room, I'm gonna hang tight on doing this, and what you all have said makes sense. I do think there would be some benefit for us to do an annual customer poll or survey about all of our facets of our business. You typically do that in the April timeframe, and so we can still look at doing that, and there may be information that can be drawn from that, even if it's after the vote, that can help us down the line. But from what I'm reading, I'm going to hang tight, and we're still planning on doing an open house as quickly as we can put that together before we take this, vote, so that the public does have an opportunity to come speak and voice their opinions. But I'll hold tight for the time being.
Thank you, Mr. Rose.
Okay.
Mr. McCullough, is that everything on that presentation? we're gonna get to, if there's anything else. The survey was the last
No,
portion.
so that was the last item. I would like the board to give me some direction about
No,
what
that's,
you'd
yeah.
like me to.
So there's 4 items here, guys, and Gwen, myself, and Kevin, we met with David on a monthly basis going through this whole process, and unfortunately, we can't all be together at those meetings due to rules. But we need to give Mr. McCullough direction. We've got the opt-in without Lubbock Power and Light being the polar was one item there. The timeline, I know, Mr. Taylor, we had issues with that timeline as well. And then adjusting the rates, that was very short. I think we thought that was a bigger headache. And then finally, the survey there. So I know Mr. McCullough wants direction as to what our agenda item looks like for our February meeting. And be ready to take a vote on this, assuming that's the way the resolution's written up, where LP&L is not the polar. There are going to be caveats on there of when, everything else, but that's what Mr. McCullough is looking for today. So looking down the line, y'all going to be ready to vote?
We could do a thumbs up, thumbs down on each one of these line items, get a consensus.
We don't have Jenny here to tell us, so I don't know.
Yeah, I talked to her about it. She said it's fine. It's posted for open session. Y'all can take a straw poll or however you want to do it.
So we can start there with item 1 real quick. Having a resolution drawn up where we're opting in without Lubbock Power and Light being the polar.
No, LP&L should not be the polar.
I agree, we should not be the polar.
Mr. Boatman?
I agree.
I agree.
Ms. Henry?
I agree.
Okay. As far as the timeline goes, it would be the hold harmless payments. Mr. Taylor, I think that was your item, that the concern there, 2027.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I guess I would recommend at this point that we not wait until the end of the hold harmless payments.
I agree.
I agree.
I agree.
Mr. Bowen? Agree? Okay. And then adjusting the rates, that was page, I think that was pretty quick and easily discussed. That we would
That's
not.
moot if you don't
Yeah,
defer.
yeah.
Right.
And then as far as the survey, I would have to agree the timeline's a little short for that, so put that in our bag, and you can do an annual survey or something later on. But I think Mr. Griffith's point of being here 8 years and knowing what the survey is, we just rely on that one. Don't charge us for it, though. Any other items under?
Mr. Chair?
Yes, sir.
May I make an observation? When we did this in September 2015, as a electric utility board and a council, we were not aiming for opt-in at that point. We were simply aiming to get our system into ERCOT and enjoy a lesser wholesale price of power because of the capacity payments in SPP. That's what started this. The opt-in is something that we did say before the PUC that we thought was good for the citizens of Lubbock. And I understand we've been aiming in that direction, and I think we're going to get there. But I felt like it was important that we raise these issues, especially the effects on our citizens, especially those who don't choose power to choose. And the information we've received today has greatly assuaged my mind as far as the impact on those people. And I hope it has y'all's as well. So, Mr. Chairman, that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Taylor.
Mr. Chairman? Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
I'd just like to add to that we, having been around since 2015, that the other thing that impacted our decision was that we did not want to do build another power plant that would have been out of date, very expensive and out of date before we completed it. So that was another reason we went going down in this direction.
Thank you, Ms. Henry. If there's no other items under 3A through L, we will now recess into executive session in accordance with 1 BTCA Government Code 551.086 on competitive matters of Lubbock Power and Light, 2, VTCA Government Code 551.071, seeking advice of and consultation with LP&L's attorneys on a matter in which the duty of the attorney to the governmental body under the Texas disciplinary rules of professional conduct of the State Bar of Texas clearly conflicts with Chapter 551 of the Government Code, and seeking advice of its attorneys about pending or contemplated litigation or settlement offers. And 3, VTCA Government Code 551.074, to the appointment, employment, evaluation, reassignment, and/or duties of a public officer or employee, being the Director of Electric Utilities, Chief Financial Officer, and Director of Customer Service, and deliberate the appointment of a public officer or employee, the EUB. Love Power and Lights Board is now in executive session.
City Council will hold an executive session today for the purpose of consulting with the city staff regarding competitive matters of the public power utilities under Section 551.086 of the Texas Government Code, pending or contemplated litigation or settlement offers, and hold consultation with attorney under Section 551.071 of the Texas Government Code, and personnel matters under Section 551.074 of the Texas Government Code.
Thank you, Ms. Joy. We're going to have executive session in here today. 139 and the EUB will reconvene into open session.
And the city council is convened in open session as well.
Brings us to item 9. Mr. McCullough.
Yeah, just a couple of quick things. On page 39 of the written materials, you can see some of the highlights from our social media. The picture at the bottom of the page there shows our new customer support group, account support team, and that's a group that the board and council created that has really done a good job and have gotten a lot of compliments. So we're really thankful for them. On page 40, I guess page 40. Yeah, top of page 40. There's a picture of your new director who will be starting in May there. And then, of course, there's been some media coverage of the board's efforts to move towards deregulation. Then on page 48, some of the metrics, we are seeing an improvement in the call hold times, call wait times, and so it's good to see that as well. That's all that I had, Mr. Chairman, but I'm happy to respond to any comments that you may have or questions.
Mr. Taylor.
Mr. McCullough, I noted earlier in the previous open the activities there, and I'm referencing the table at the bottom that shows customer reconnects and disconnects. So that roughly 4,000 each. I mean, would you say that's a representative month, or is it a little less than normal, or?
Yeah, it's probably, we're returning to normal now. As you know, we were playing catch-up on disconnections there for a while, but we have sort of resumed our normal process now, so that I'll ask the expert.
Yes, ma'am.
I think probably for that time of year, it might be at this time representative. I mean, since coming back into our collection processes and the new CCS system, we have structured them a little bit differently than in the past, historically. So I would think this time of year it's probably about representative of what it will be this time of year.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay.
And we are caught up on disconnects.
We're limiting disconnections to about 300 per day, if we have that many, just to limit the traffic that the call center has to monitor and deal with.
Right, and we may not disconnect the water during the same month that we disconnect the electric for one customer.
Yeah,
It'll follow month after month.
Electric is still the first,
yeah.
yes. Okay. I was just, when I saw that and I pulled that number, so some months it is higher than that, and some months it is
higher, and one of the differences, and it may not be a huge difference, but one of the difference between historically, prior to coming into this new CCS system, is we, at an apartment complex, for example, if the apartment complex had 10 meters and they were past due, we might go and disconnect all 10 meters.
I see.
In the new process, we may just do 1 meter and then hopefully get that attention of that customer.
I see.
So that could be a reason for some of the reduction.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions, Mr. Fields? No. Nope. Thank you, Mr. McCullough.
That's it.
Okay. That brings us to, what was item 9? Item 10? Joe, anything?
We don't have anything this month.
Nothing for 10.
I think we're planning on having financial reports at the next board meeting.
Okay. Item 11, regulatory matters regarding ERCOT. Mr. Rose?
I won't take much time, and I don't have any slides on this. I was just going to tell you that David talked at length last month about the market redesign and the phase 1 that plan that the PUC approved. They had a meeting last week in which ERCOT was present. ERCOT was tasked by the PUC with evaluating phase 1 proposals and reporting back by January 10th with a project plan, estimate of implementation, and a description of impediments. And basically the discussion revolved around the fact that they're in this process, but they're not quite there yet. One of the things you might have seen in some headlines that ERCOT cited is staffing shortages, just like everybody else around us these days. Staffing vacancies and shortages is a challenge. So they did cite that. Some of the PUC commissioners asked that they take a look at bringing contractors or third parties to make sure that the timeline doesn't slide. The PUC is going to be participating in the ERCOT board meeting on January 27th to talk about future timelines. So still working through it. In all of its different parts, but that's just kind of the short update that ERCOT's basically said that they haven't fallen off track, but they're worried about timelines, and a lot of commissioners said that they want to make sure that they do whatever is necessary to implement these new kind of phase 1 approaches of retail market design by next winter. That's their goal.
Questions? Thank you, Mr. Rose. Brings us to item 12, consider resolution recommending to the City Council, City of Lubbock, 5 appointments and/or reappointments as applicable to the EUB in accordance with Section 2.03.415E of the Code of Ordinances of the City of Lubbock. Ms. Stafford.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to recommend the reappointment of Mr. Butch Davis, Mr. Eddie Schultz, Mr. Solomon Fields, and the appointment of Mr. Lewis Harville and Mr. Dan Wilson to the Electric Utility Board.
Okay, we have a motion.
Second.
And have a second by Mr. Fields for the reappointment of Mr. Davis, Mr. Fields, Mr. Schultz, with the additions of Dan Wilson replacing Mr. Taylor and Lewis Harville replacing Mr. Boatman. All those in favor? Probably easier to raise your right hand while you're driving. Raise your right hand. Opposed by the same? That one carries 8-0. All right, item 13, discuss and take minute action related to the date of the regular Electric Utility Board meeting for March 15th, 2022. That falls the week of spring break, so generally we end up moving that one. Folks are moving around doing those type things. I don't know what page it's on here, but I know there were some dates.
Page 52.
Page 52, let me get to that. So that following week, this is also a 5-week month of March. So you've got March 21st, which is a Monday, 22nd is not available, and then Wednesday the 23rd, Thursday the 24th would only be 1 to 5, which does not work with mine, and then March 25th is open all day. So basically Monday all day, or Monday, Wednesday, and Friday open all day. Does anybody have any dates there? I would not be available on the 24th, so just scratch that one. But the 21st, 23rd, and 25th are open all day. Does anybody?
Doesn't matter to me.
Mr. Fields?
Monday, Wednesday, Friday?
Monday.
21st.
Monday is better for me.
Monday. Monday's
Henry?
better for me. Monday is better.
Monday works better. Ms. Schultz?
I'm good on Monday.
I'm good on Monday.
I think oh, that's March. I was thinking February. Okay, well, let's plan on Monday. We're gonna have to get a motion on this, but I would say our regular scheduled time, but that Monday, the 21st. So I would entertain a motion.
So moved.
Get a motion.
Second.
Got a motion by Eddie and a second by Mr. Fields. All those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye. Aye. Opposed by the same?
Assume at the normal meeting time, correct?
Yes. Okay. 8-0. All right, that finally brings us to item 14, discuss, deliberate, and take minute action regarding benefits of the Director of Utilities. We need to take minute action. Everyone's aware Mr. McCullough has 4 weeks of vacation. I think city policy only showed 2 or some confusion there. Whenever we did this 3-4 years ago, we did the, with ERCOT and everything else, somehow we did not take minute action where he is eligible for 4 weeks of vacation. So we need to entertain a motion there.
So move.
Second.
Could you
Second.
tell me what the motion is, Ms. Stafford?
The motion is for the Director of Electric Utilities to have benefits of 4 weeks vacation in his package.
Thank you, Ms. Stafford. I have a motion. I have a second by Mr. Taylor, I believe.
Yes, sir.
All those in favor? Any discussion? If not, all those in favor, raise your right hand, say aye.
Aye.
All right.
Aye.
Opposed by the same? Carries 8-0. That brings us to the consent agenda with items 15 through 22. If there is no discussion on any of those individually, I'll entertain a motion for those. A motion by Mr. Boatman. Need a second?
Second.
A second by Butch. Any discussion? All those in favor, right hand, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Opposed by the same? Carries 8-0. Brings us to item 23. This meeting is adjourned.
That's your favorite item.
That's the